underway. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're going to start just by providing a very quick summary of a presentation of some research that we've done just as the background to this event. So let me just quickly share my screen and bring up the slides. There we go, and everyone should be able to see that now. So first of all, thank you very much, Pearl, for the welcome. We are here today to talk about a topic that hopefully is front of mind and incredibly important to everyone who's joining us today, and that is building the ad marketplace, the TV advertising marketplace of the future. The conversation we're about to have with these three gentlemen was inspired by a piece of research undertaken during the last few months, looking at some of the priorities that both buy-side and sell-side companies in the US and internationally feel should be absolutely front and center for every company as we look to realize and unlock the potential of some of the new capabilities coming into the market. The good news is that the research is available in a paper that is available for download now on the Comcast Technology Solutions website. There will be a link available. You should be able to get hold of it very quickly. The research involved depth interviews with 40 senior industry executives. 3 of whom I'm delighted to say have been able to join us today, both from within the Comcast and NBCU family of companies, but also more widely. We've generally tried to engage deeply with the entire industry to get a sense of what those big priorities are. What do people feel needs to happen during the course of the next 5 years to really unlock the potential of all that's happening in the world of TV. And there is, make no mistake, a lot happening in the world of television. TV, as everyone knows, has clearly transitioned. It's transitioned very quickly from a broadcast-only industry to a truly multi-platform video market, both in the US and internationally. The good news is that TV and video advertising within that context remains uniquely valuable and effective for any company wanting to build a brand, engage with customers at scale, really unlock the full potential of that market. TV is uniquely powerful, but new opportunities are proliferating. TV now can do much, much more. It can be used for sales activation. It allows very, very direct addressable advertising, a whole range of new potential. These opportunities, however, are not all fully in place. And one of the big priorities that came out of our research was that more work is required to really realize in full these opportunities. So what were the 4 priorities that came out of research? Well, the first priority was standardization, to really develop the technical solutions, standards, and working practices required to support addressability. The good news is that addressability has become much more widely available, both on traditional linear broadcast, but also on streaming and VOD, of course. But stitching all of that together can still be complex for the buy side. And a clear ask from advertisers and agencies was to make the market easier to transact with at scale, especially in the US, where you have a significant number of scale MVPDs, smart televisions, streaming services, and other different platforms, some of which can be complicated to engage with, and not all of which are standardized. So that was priority 1, building out addressable at scale and making the market more seamless to interact with. Priority 2 from our research is looking at the other side of the equation, looking at workflows. Now, saying addressable advertising and taking advantage of it is all very straightforward, but addressable does put a big ask on the workflows and business processes of buy-side companies. It creates a significant proliferation of creative assets, and often if you're looking to optimize in flight, it requires agencies and in some cases advertisers to retool and really reimagine their operations to take advantage of things like automation and the full potential of addressable. So priority 2 from our research was to transform those workflows, and that requires investment. Priority 3 is really data, data, data. The TV data marketplace has clearly been developing very rapidly. And the positive news is that big data that can support much more targeted granular advertising, the development of custom audience segments, the resolution of identity, and much more sophisticated and nuanced approaches to attribution have proliferated. But the bad news is that not all data is good and not all data is the same. And I think a third priority that came very strongly through from our research was the need to really build out industry-wide practices that can support the greater application of data to multi-platform inventory. We need to standardize, and simplify. And the fourth priority from our research was looking at the opportunities more generally to collaborate as an industry in the development of standards that really allow the industry to invest at scale and with confidence that the new platforms and capabilities being introduced across the market work in a seamless way across different platforms and pools of inventory. The TV industry has always been heavily driven by standards at each stage of the value chain, but advanced advertising has developed very quickly, and it's not fully clear that standards have caught up. So that's the fourth priority that came out of our research. Now, to address these four priorities in more detail and to give us a sense of the kinds of opportunities that can be unlocked in the marketplace of the future, let's turn back to our panel. So, to get the ball rolling, I wanted to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and then to give us a sense, really, of what we're building towards. What is this marketplace of the mid-20s? What kinds of opportunities will it present to the buy side? Why should advertisers and agencies be excited? Richard, do you want to lead us in?
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks, John. Hi, Brad. Hi, Mark. Well, John, firstly, thanks for facilitating this. I know it's been a heavy lift and we've got some fantastic input to the white paper, so it's a great job. I think genuinely I'm really excited about what's happened, but I think more importantly what is going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think at a headline, what struck me, being that this was European and US based research, that there was a clear unification of thought around A, the opportunities, and B, the challenges. So that's a good start that the world is now seeing this from sort of more of a global perspective. I think from my lens, from a Comcast Technology Solutions, what is exciting, but also I think challenging, is we're going to see a massive, and we are starting to see a massive increase of ad volume growth over the next 3 to 5 years, about 7x increase to be precise in terms of various metrics that you can see. That's great, and for all the obvious reasons you're going to see that ad volume growth. I think the challenge though is on top of that, in an emerging addressable world, you're going to get personalization on top of that, so i.e. numerous versions of that ad. So again, that's going to give an exponential kind of growth on top of that 7x. So that's going to cause some challenges, and the challenges that exist today are really about the sort of the workflow management of, there is a lot of manual processes that the industry has, certainly on the buy side, and that kind of goes right the way through to the sell side. So automation through technology is critical, absolutely critical, to deal with that scale. We think we've solved for that to some degree, but it's critical that we get that base level of bringing all the sources of truth into one place to manage that ad volume growth. And when you layer on personalization on top of that, then you can deal with the scale. But I do think the excitement's there, the trajectory of travel is there, but I think as an industry, and you call it out, that there has to be some investment around the automation of workflows and making sure that we can actually deal with that growth. Otherwise, we can be as sophisticated as we want in terms of targeting. Otherwise, that ain't going to happen. So that's my headline.
That's worth knowing. Thank you, Richard. Bradley, as the broadcaster on the panel, I'm guessing you're going to have a very particular view. And obviously, NBCU has made some really exciting announcements over the last few months as it looks to take advantage of these opportunities. Give us a sense of how you're responding to these changes and of what you think the promise of this new marketplace is. Why should advertisers be excited?
Thanks, John. And thank you, Richard. Good to see you, Mark. So my role and function inside NBCUniversal is one of providing services to our advertisers and the market as we sell and they buy from us. And so where it becomes very critical for us and the excitement starts to play into what the future looks like is that buying these new capabilities and advertisers' desire for new capabilities is undeniable, and it will be the future of what we do. but the history and the scalability and the reliability of how they've been developed is all very young and very nascent. So if you look back at just the legacy of linear television, we've got a long history of having a whole lot of yesterdays. And every yesterday we improve the process just a little bit better to where legacy television runs at a fairly well-oiled machine. And now with adding in new functionalities, new capabilities, new data needs, all these new scalability capabilities that Richard spoke about, kind of creates this complexity of service, right? So my job and my team's job is to make sure that our clients are happy with the exchange that they have with NBC and the ease of doing business with us. And so to be able to do that, it's not just a solution upon us as a network or us as a publisher to be good, but it's us to help develop what's needed for the industry from a workflow, because it is a connected workflow all the way from an advertiser to an agency to a delivery company to an ad serving vendor. So to make sure that we're tied along the way, so it doesn't just work for us, but it works for our customers as well.
And if you successfully execute on all of that, what excites you about that marketplace of the future that you're building today?
Really all the exciting opportunities that our advertisers have to do to reach their customers in really new and unique ways. So knowing that there's a desire to do better, to market better, to really target that customer. And if we can excel on being able to deliver those customer needs, that's the most exciting thing.
Great, thank you for that. Let's bring in Mark. Mark, you obviously have an important role at one of the most important TV ad tech businesses in the world and work with many of the largest media organizations. Give us a sense of what you think the promise of these new technologies is for the TV ad marketplace of the future. What is there to be really excited about over the next few years?
Great, yeah, thank you. And thanks for hosting and moderating. This is a very exciting topic, something that's near and dear to our heart. It's what we focus on day in and day out. And we do that both on how do we help bring technologies and platforms in place to help publishers and operators globally on the supply side, but also how do we help to support the buy side as well with platforms and technologies to support their workflow and the connections that they do have to companies like NBC. From my perspective, I think you hit it with that research, which was the ability to standardize and automate processes is something of great importance. I also think this concept of interoperability is going to be one of great importance as well, because with those standards and automation, it's not just one company. Many companies are trying to solve the different pieces of the equation as we move to a more addressable future. For me, the most exciting piece comes really most from the consumer perspective. I think from a brand mentality, the operational ease that can be constructed if we do achieve this in the right way allows for much better visibility into not only how they reach consumers, brands, and agencies, but also the impact that that has. I think that's one big important component to it. The other big important component that excites me is really about the performance that comes around it. Right now, it is, again, there's a lot of different components that exist, whether it be the measurement tools and the unique bespoke ways in which both buyers and sellers value or measure the ways in which they work. And I think from a standardization and an automation perspective, the visibility into what works and why, and almost in the most simplest form, the metrics of reach and frequency and understanding that impact is of great importance. The last thing I'd say is, again, from an agency and a marketer perspective, is it's very hard right now. We have a lot of different solutions out there. There's a lot of different ways in which you can approach achieving an objective. It's very, very fragmented. I think the work that this group and the industry is doing right now will help to make that a heck of a lot easier to understand, a heck of a lot easier to implement and execute. And then it shifts from how do we operate to much more about what are the objectives we're trying to achieve and have a much clearer way in which to go and do that.
So a lot of this is work in progress, but if the work is done and it goes well, then the promise is really exciting. Okay, so that's a sense of where we're headed. Now, before we look any further forwards, I thought it might be valuable to start by having a quick look back and really just to try and contextualize what's happening by thinking a bit about the enormous progress that's been made over the last 10 years. So I wanted to ask the panelists really to peer into their crystal balls, and rather than looking forwards in time, to peer back in time to 2010 and to try and remember what the market looked like then. And just to give us a sense of what you see as being the most notable advancements in the last decade. What's really moved? Because a lot of what we're talking about now has been happening for some time, but how far have we come? Richard, do you want to start us off? When you think about the last decade, what have been the most important areas of progress from your point of view?
Yeah, we could be here for hours. I mean, there's been a massive shift for sure, but I think, having thought about this, the biggest thing for me is that I think we're in a genuine world now of omni-channel, which I don't think existed. I'm trying to sort of hark back 10 years. I mean, that does seem like a millennial away, which is important. So there's a lot more transparency across sort of channel and audiences, and what I'd say emerging attribution. And that's been a big progress, as sort of Mark alluded to. Big step forward. I think things like, and I was thinking, what's been a catalyst? AdSmart, that was launched by Sky in Europe, has now sort of come over to the US. I think that's a decent step forward. I know NBC launched C-Flight, which is starting to emerge as an interesting platform to how audiences are looked at. So I think there's some emerging standards, but Mark's spot on, and I think as an industry we need to kind of come together and bring that as one. I think the challenges that still exist, and then again Mark alluded to it spot on. I think yes, we're in a world of omni-channel, but it's not particularly frictionless in terms of how you can go and buy. It's very, very fragmented, as Mark alluded to. But I think there are, again, emerging groups and huddles such as Project Or, the Unaddressability Initiative, that I think are starting to try and set the standards as well. But I think the good news is, back to my headline point, I guess, is that we can now genuinely, with transparency and to some degree in real time, buy in an omnichannel way. Whereas before, there's still groups of silos, but before, it's certainly moved on. It's not there to a world of perfection, but it's a damn sight easier than it was 10 years ago. That's for sure. So I think that would be my big step forward.
So Bradley, when you think about what's happened within the organization you work for, and I think I'm right, but you were with NBCU in 2010. You've been there for a little while. So when you look back at the organization of 2020 and fast forward over the last 10 years, how different is it now to what it was in 2010? What have been the really big shifts in the way NBCU thinks about its advertising business?
Yeah, to follow up on Richard's comments, the proliferation of content, and then that content availability through streaming platforms and individual experiences for audiences to consume our content at their desire and will, and then the ability to target that marketing message directly to that advertiser through that experience. We did not have this same level of capability in 2010. So to see, where we've come from 2010 with our content, where we are now, and how the strength of the quality of that content equal to the strength of a marketer's message can really drive, products and desire with our customers, is just, a massive enhancement to the value that we have as an opportunity for clients. So, and then technologically speaking, underneath that, again, 10 years ago, we were talking about getting tapes for commercials to put on television. So, now we're trying to figure out how can we, digitally change an ad right before it airs to reach a unique customer at the right time with the right message or messaging from the marketer. And that's a really short period of time to make such a massive leap when you just stop and think about it in that capacity.
It's a great example and a fantastic example of really how far we've come. I mean, Mark, from a Freewheel point of view, as a tech provider, when you look back at the technologies and products that were in market in 2010, what's really been transformed? What's your sense of the really fundamental changes from a tech point of view?
So I would say this is both tech and consumer, really. But if you go back 10 years and you think about the direct-to-consumer offerings, like a Peacock, and you look at it today, I think transformationally, we have transformed this way in which consumers can can access content in really, really good ways. I think so. That's a huge milestone that has been achieved, and it's really just in the beginning phases. It's only continuing to ramp. As you can imagine, that has some pretty big implications on the technical side of things, not just in how you support a live event where you have 10 million concurrent viewers of something like the World Cup happening digitally, but also how you support the advertising that goes along with that. And I think some of the other things that we've seen that have really kind of evolved over time. So that's more from a content and a consumer perspective and the impact that that has on the infrastructure that sits below it. I think the other big transformation, everyone talked about data, but I think data and how key it is to everyone, not just one side, not just one brand, not just an agency, and certainly not just an operator or a publisher. That role of data is something that is so critical. It's both the exposure of who is watching, it's the targeting, and this really has fueled a huge, huge uptick from a test and learn from an audience-based buying model to a this is how we do it. And we've seen a lot of new companies come about, whether it be OpenAP. Again, we talked about or on addressability. All of these things are really a byproduct of this bigger shift to an audience-based model. But lastly, I'd say is it also has really given a rebirth to the importance, because we just talked about all this fragmentation. It also gave a rebirth to the importance of tentpoles and live events, I think, because of all the fragmentation and choose your own time to watch anything, finding those concurrent viewers at one time, I think has bolstered the importance of tentpoles like the Olympics, like the Super Bowl, and everything that goes in between those two. So I use that as an example to say it's pretty interesting to see, yes, we have an audience-based future, and addressability is certainly the foundation for that, but it also is giving rise to the importance of how do I reach multiple people, many, many millions of people at one time. And so again, these tentpoles become even more invigorated as an important part to a media mix.
And the thing to me which feels exciting about that is that you now have a much greater variety of options to present to your typical advertiser in terms of how they reach their audience, with what frequency, with what mass, with what weight, and so on, which really opens the market up in a way. Mark, let's stick with you for a moment, because I think the next part of the puzzle we should talk about is scaling up addressable, which I think was one of the key priorities coming out of research for the next few years. Now, obviously, addressable in some senses is both not new. We've been talking about addressable advertising for several years, but it still, in many respects, has quite a long way to go to unlock its full potential. What's the work that still needs to be done if we're really going to capitalize on the promise of addressable? What's already in place and what still needs to happen?
So I think from an execution perspective, that's really where we've been focused as an industry from an addressable mindset. How do we serve the ad to an individual household? And it's much more from an execution. The challenge comes when we do have to scale it. And you mentioned earlier on, there's both the standardization and the automation that has to go hand in hand. The biggest piece that I think we often forget about, we talk about addressability, and we talk about addressability as a one-off campaign execution. Oh, I'm running an addressable campaign. We might sell an addressable campaign. The challenge is that going to an addressable future changes every aspect of how we operate. It changes our order management systems that sit with NBC. It changes our creative management that sits within CTS. It changes our historical ratings and viewership of that rating process, our buying models, our media mix models, all fundamentally change. And it's less about the execution of addressable, but more the workflow that goes along with that. Even things like Strata or MediaOcean, platforms that are inherent in the agency and advertiser communities to help manage their process, have to fundamentally change as well. Those historical ratings and estimates and forecasts all have a lot to need evolution. And so when we look at what's both exciting and the importance of standardization, it's not just standardization of, oh, how do you count an impression? It's standardization of how I even got to running that campaign. That is a huge, huge lift. And I think it will really give rise to both on the sell side, how we sell, the pricing models that we go up to market with. But I also think we'll have a fundamental change on how the agencies and the advertisers look at how they price things. I think the idea or simple concept of a currency against the CPM on a demo might very much go away, and new models will come about. And so that's a big change to our industry and our ecosystem.
I mean, that's a fascinating perspective, I think, on where we are and where we have to go. I mean, Bradley, as one of the leading TV businesses in the States, does that resonate with you? Where can you give us a sense of where you think you are on your addressable journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mark hit all the big points, and if you break them down individually, adjusting and adapting to that change for anyone within the supply chain, whether it's an advertiser or an agency, because it's a little sticky, because it's a little difficult, as much as it makes sense and is desirable as it might be, it's hard. And so how do we make it not so hard? So just in the regards to addressable in itself, building an audience that's desired for a campaign that an advertiser wants to hit, that's a difficult task to do. So it's not something today that is, you punch in 4 numbers into a computer and 10 seconds later it pops out and you execute upon that. You really have to take in a lot of considerations from different data elements and how you access those data points to build that audience, to create that campaign, to execute to what that advertiser wants to do. And that takes time. So how do we, as a service provider, as an industry, start to release or reduce the amount of time it takes to find those audiences, to execute those desires, and just do it in hyper speed, right? So we don't have decades to make this better. We've got a small amount of time to really fulfill what our advertisers are expecting in a way that they want to communicate to their viewers.
And just give us a sense, at the moment, are you running multiple different platforms and tools for different pools of inventory, or have you been bringing it all together and gradually converging these workflows and processes?
So I guess a little bit of both. So we're very public with our one platform strategy as NBCUniversal, to go out and say to what you kind of kicked off at the very beginning, John, where we've got multiple viewers of our content across multiple screens, and we as a network and a publisher can fulfill marketing messages across all of those screens and in one combined type of buy. But at the same time, we are also capable of uniquely delivering campaigns very specifically for a particular type of buy with a particular type of audience that is unique and niche based on an advertiser's needs. So, the scale comes obviously in providing not just for us, but our clients and our advertisers in a more global and larger perspective on something like a one platform. But we also provide white glove service and niche capabilities and really targeted campaigns.
That's really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about workflows. So addressable is one side of the equation, but Richard, as you mentioned, to really take advantage of workflows, we need to see a lot of retooling, not just on the buy side, but also, not just on the sell side, but also on the buy side. Give us some sense of where, from your experiences, the big agency groups and advertisers are in dealing with some of those priorities. When it comes to taking full advantage, what needs to happen and how far advanced are we?
I'd say it's work in progress. There's still some, just if I'm just talking from the buy side, there's still some structural challenges around a siloed approach, even at a basic level, from linear TV and all things digital. So there has to be some change from a structural perspective, but I do think that technology can help bridge that gap by unifying all of those channels to bring in, again, all these sources of truth into kind of one place, so that a buyer, but back to, I guess, my side, looking at Brad's side, a buyer can then look at, what content is run, what ads have gone across different content across different channels and different formats to see what's been working. That's where we need to get to, because again, and we touched on all the challenges around addressable. The where we are now, addressable should take us to a place of what I call, I guess, the near sort of holy grail of perfection. But getting there is, there's a fairly long road to do that. But ultimately, from a workflow perspective, if you're not seeing the full picture in one platform or system, how can you then look at what's worked and then get that attribution back and then change it? Because you can be able to change these things on the fly. So if I've seen one ad version of an auto car and it's a SUV, rather than going, well, I'm just going to hit that person 6 times with the same ad and it's an SUV, actually maybe the second ad should be a sports car in an urban landscape versus the SUV with kids in the back in a country setting in the first one. Now, if you don't have a platform to unify all those points about what has gone there in the first place, you will not get to a place of more personalization and learning and having those algorithms behind to then serve more relevance based on an addressable world. So that's where we need to get to. I think there's some pathways to get there, but I do think, there's, as I say, in summary, there's some structural stuff from the buy side. There's technology gaps because there's lots of point solutions, and certainly what we're trying to do, again, working with the Freewheel and the NBCs, is to, how we make that as frictionless as possible and transparent and unified, because I think that will give us a base foundation to then get and to deliver a more seamless workflow in an addressable world.
I mean, it doesn't sound like it's as challenging as trying to change jets on a 747 while in flight, but it doesn't sound far off it. I mean, how monumental a task is this? Is it a question of baby steps, bit by bit, or do you really have to go for some grand transformation in one big bang?
No, I mean, I'm sure the guys will have, maybe the same but different view, but this is an evolution, not a revolution. I think, as Brad said right up front, if you think where we were 10 years ago to where we are now, we have tried to change legacy-based system and bring them up to date. But I think going forward, this is why I think as an industry, and hence really all the 40 odd people that input into this document, the white paper, that it's important that we act like an industry. We can't, NBC can't go off and do their thing and Free will do their thing and we do our thing. We have to act as one, because ultimately all ships need to rise. There has to be greater ROI ultimately for the advertiser. And frankly, get greater ROI, you're going to get greater yield on the sell side. So therefore everyone wins. So it is around, can technology bridge a lot of these gaps that exist? Yes. And then how do we all work together to frankly try and tick off a lot of the challenges that Mark highlighted right up front in this addressable world that we're shifting quite rapidly into?
Okay, let's talk about the third priority, which I think is data enablement. Mark, it seems that it's very hard to avoid discussion about the use of data to enhance and grow the TV market. I think there's a consensus emerging that data is going to be critical for driving growth and innovation in the 2020s. But obviously data is not new. How are we using data at the moment, and how could we be using data in the future to really supercharge the market?
I can speak from what I see, and still the use of third-party data still continues to be a very important component to that equation. Consumer privacy is like the standard, and I think putting the consumer first is something that I know Comcast does, but I know it's not necessarily unique to Comcast. We do know that a lot of companies are trying to come up with solutions to solve for this idea around identity. Google Flock is a great example of that. The Trade Desk Unified ID 2.0. But there are a host of other Blockgraph, which is a company that was incubated out of Freewheel, that's looking to really take a federated approach. So I think from that perspective, consumer privacy will still be paramount, not to mention all the regulations that we're dealing with, and staying within those. And they do, GDPR certainly was that first kind of entry into it. But then we saw CCPA and it continues to evolve globally as to how we continue to protect consumers. Today, what we are seeing most frequently is the desire for brands to use their first-party data. Use their first-party data and create the audiences, sure, but also really start to track the life cycle of a consumer. And for today, I'd say from an addressable perspective, it's much more about sending down a very tailored message to a household. In the digital world, we've been using data to more accurately target at the individual level. And certainly that's something that people have seen great value in. And so it's somewhere in between those two worlds where we have to understand the co-viewing habits that take place in a household. But that being said, the use of data right now, I think that there is certainly the targeting piece, but I think the most important component is on the measurement side. How do we use the data and what has happened to inform, and is it working? How does that change the models that we use going forward? And how does that change the way in which we execute moving forward? So I'd say privacy of the consumer is number one. From a Freewheel perspective, what we're hearing a lot about is more from a user experience. How does the consumer data inform not just the ad experience, but actually the platform and viewer experience? And that's one thing that, I can speak with regard to NBC. It's a huge priority for them because that consumer experience as it relates to the entire environment in which they're consuming content has to be taken into consideration. And so a lot of the data is just to enhance, not to target, but just to enhance the experiences that attract those eyeballs.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, and Bradley, Mark referred to some of the work that NBCU does. How has the proliferation of data and the desire of advertisers to apply their own data to their TV and video ad campaigns changed your workflows and processes?
So it's been a massive shift in the way, obviously, even in a again, back to that 10-year time gap, right? Like how we've approached buying and selling, how we've been delivering audiences. And, to even follow up on what Mark was saying, consumer privacy as it matures is really starting to drive around even the technology solutions on how that happens. So as it proliferates and people understand more and the privacy becomes a greater aspect, that then adjusts and adapts the change of how the data can be implemented in the service and what you can buy and how you can target. And again, all these massive changes in such a short period of time really kind of add up. For us, again, third-party data from our advertisers is as important to them as it is for us to be able to deliver on, but can also be just as private. And so we've just recently announced, and a lot more to come in that regard, but our Ad Insights Hub, where we'll have a very common place for advertisers to securely and safely store their data that they want to target against, that we can kind of pull into our environments, deliver back, and then communicate quickly back to them about how that operates, but in a way that is privacy select for our advertisers without having to expose a whole lot of information, even to us, for what they're desiring to get done. So and that's all, as a new announcement just coming from last month. So we're really pushing forward on all things data. We used to be a really, and always have been, a massive content company, and now more and more it feels like we're a large data company that has really great content. So it's really starting to shift the mindset of how we operate and how we view data for our customers.
It's a really interesting perspective. So from a data point of view, Richard, do you see common challenges on the buy side? Obviously, not all agencies and advertisers are the same, and there's a very diverse range of capabilities and strategies out there. In your dealings with the buy side, are there common challenges from a data point of view which crop up repeatedly?
I guess yes and no. If you look at CTV as a kind of the new hot channel that's kind of emerged and frankly accelerated during the pandemic, when you strip it all back, advertisers follow eyeballs, and they'll continue to follow them if there's an ROI. And I think what we've seen within, frankly, the explosive growth of CTV, that in my view is kind of a hybrid behind sort of old school digital and this emerging addressable TV, it's clearly working, right? Because you're seeing a lot of spend going behind it. And I think the learnings from how media agencies and DSPs are cleverer with targeting and using data and then driving that more real-time performance is coming through in that world of CTV. So I mean, I think that bodes well, very well, frankly, from what we talked about earlier around sort of addressability, because there's clearly an appetite there, because it's all around the ROI, and ultimately that's what an advertiser and a buy side looks at, and they'll throw more and more money behind it if they can hit the right audience and get the performance that they need. So I'm encouraged by, I think, the sophistication of all things programmatic in how they think and execute campaigns, born out of old school banner right the way through now to this fusion point of CTV is working, and clearly data is a key part of that. And it's positively working well. So I think that bodes well for the future.
Yeah, I'd add one thing to the component. So the byproduct of this data, I think data costs on all fronts will continue to increase. So as you think about your 5-year planning cycles, it's like, well, we probably should put a little more operating expense into the data side of the house. It also will see a big transformation in talent. I think the talent that a technology company, sure, but an agency, a brand, a media company, a lot more in the data science world. And it's really, it's interesting because we have to compete with different industries to get a different type of talent. And so it's going to be interesting as we think about how just even the makeup, the cultural makeup of our companies, all of them, will certainly transform.
It's a great point, and fascinating to see that cultural change happening literally in front of us. Now we have some great questions coming in. We're running into the final part of our discussion. I wanted to ask you, Mark, a very quick question about our fourth priority, standardization, which I was wondering if you could try and do in no more than a minute, and then we'll take some questions which have come through. So standardization, in a nutshell, what still needs to be standardized in order to unlock the full potential of the new TV ad marketplace? Isn't everything standardized already, or is there still work to be done?
A little bit of work to be done. In 1 minute, I'd say the standardization is taking place in silos. Reconciliation for an agency or an advertiser. All right, I have a new currency. So the standardization of how new addressable formats and currencies take place and how I measure and reconcile that is a big silo as an example. The audiences that we talk about is again, I think we're getting in a good spot for it. But again, that's in a silo, very kind of one-off or manual, even if it is standardized. The biggest thing that we have to do right now is the standardization across all of those and how we connect that full workflow. That has not taken place yet in a meaningful way to scale to the way we need to. The last thing I'd say in this topic is likely the standardization of the legacy systems that each of our companies, and I mean as an industry, the legacy systems that we've either homegrown, that we've built our own tech stack with different vendors or partners that we've helped to develop it. All of that has to be rethought, redesigned. And that is a lot of work and investment in time. And so I love that we're making really good efforts, whether it be on the audience front or on kind of the automation of the buy or sell. But I think the real kind of use case that needs to be addressed is how does that apply to our own systems and how we operate day in and day out.
Thank you for that, Mark. Pretty much a minute. Okay, now we have some great questions coming through. So let's pick up the first of them. Question from Carolyn Pacer, I think it is. What advice would you give to an advertiser who has a presence on linear TV, but wants to get into the CTV space? The fragmentation in the market makes it very difficult to decide who to partner with first. A DSP, a publisher, an agency to manage all for us. What would your advice be? Bradley, I'm guessing this might be one you might want to have a stab at.
I feel like I can only provide a selfish answer, right?
I was thinking that might be the case.
and to be fair, we have great relationships with many open source companies, and companies like Freewheel and the Trade Desk, and every opportunity to purchase our inventory against our content in many places. I would say, especially if you're taking the first step, if you have a trusted relationship with a long-term partner, try to first work with them to see what your capabilities are and better understand what they can do to serve you. And if they can't get what you need, but they should be able to in this day and time, there are other great options to start to explore outside of linear television to be able to purchase. So those the programmatic companies and companies like Freewheel are really growing at such massive capacity to be able to provide services to advertisers like this in a really scalable way. So that would be my first recommendation. I'll always go to your trusted relationship first.
And there's a really interesting point, I think, within that question, which is that all of these developments are creating very exciting new opportunities, but they are absolutely increasing complexity. And with great choice comes also a certain element of befuddlement and confusion.
Right.
You've got to navigate it some way, so that trust piece feels really important. Let's jump on. We have a second really interesting question here, not dissimilar, but from a different part of the world. What's your advice for a smaller production company? And I'm guessing this means an advertising production company or creative company who wants to help position itself as a valued partner with companies and publishers within this future landscape of content, branding, and exposure. Richard, I'm sure you won't want to answer this one, but do you want to have a stab at it?
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, if I'm hearing it right, if it's a kind of a production company, I think there's probably two answers I think I can come up with. One is, we talked about this big sort of hockey stick curve of ad volume growth, and therefore more opportunities to produce versions of ads. So clearly, I think there's opportunity there for production-based businesses, not just to develop one core asset, but many versions of that based on segments of audiences. However, I think that the challenge then becomes a technological one, which is how can you do that from a manual process to a more automated in, I wouldn't say real time, but probably near real time, because the point is that we've covered addressability in various forms. Producing different ads more dynamically in a kind of linear or even digital space is where it's going to go. And certainly from our perspective, we are developing technology around that to deliver more personalized creative versions. So I think the tip is, don't think about what you can do today, think about where the industry is going and where you position yourself. But ultimately, the volume is going to get bigger, but you're going to have to need technology to help drive that. So that would be my answer, if that's an answer.
One brief question, sort of subsidiary question, Richard. Do you think a lot of the changes we've spoken about apply more to lower funnel activity than kind of upper funnel brand building and awareness raising activity, or not really? It's the whole spectrum.
No, it's the whole spectrum, because I think that upper, lower, brand versus performance is now fusing into one. This is why you're seeing a lot of D2C happening. And I think because of a lot of the things we've covered today, which is what's working, what's not. Is it a brand ad? Is it performance-based ad? It doesn't really matter. Is it delivering a return on investment? And I think that old school brand, which is what I grew up in, versus performance, is just fusing into one now, because it's about ROI.
Okay. So we have one final question, which I suspect may be one that, unless any of the panel have a hitherto undisclosed expertise in digital out of home, we might have to park. The question is, do we think the new systems and processes for addressability and attribution will be applied or need to be applied to digital out of home? It is a really fascinating question. I'm guessing the answer must be yes, of course. But panel, any views on this one?
I can speak from, one of the platforms that Freewheel has is Strata, which covers all forms of media. And digital out of home is one that is increasingly becoming very, very important. not only because of the versioning that goes along with it, but also because of it's really using a lot of the same systems we use for video. And so with that, I do think this is one of those areas that will start to bleed a bit when we look at digital out of home. It might be that newest form of kind of video, if we think about it from just the exposure perspective. And how does that come together in a way that's a little bit more like a planned medium as it relates to video than it is necessarily just an out of home type of unit. And that's a lot of what the brands are looking at. Even new measurements approaches, working with Nielsen and things of that nature are also top priority for the industry.
That's really interesting. And I remember 10 years ago, we used to hear quite a lot of talk about the single big integrated display market in the sky. I think attention has shifted a bit more to sorting out TV first, but I can imagine that debate will come up again. We are running perilously short of time, so I thought we might just turn to a kind of final summing up question for the panel. What do we see as the priorities for collaboration and cooperation in the industry during the next few years to really unlock the potential of this new marketplace, which we're all excitingly wading into? Mark, do you want to go first? If you had to point at or single out a single area, particularly thinking about buy-side, sell-side cooperation, where does the industry need to come together to really unlock the potential of this market?
I would say in the automation of those transactions. I think what NBC is doing certainly with their hub is an example of allowing buyers and sellers to protect the areas in which they think are most important, not relinquish control on either side, but allow them to connect in a way that allows both sides to understand what the other is trying to do. And I think that is probably the biggest transformation that will take place, and doing that and again in an automated fashion. Because if it's not automated, I think then we will continue to see these iterative movement and not full scale.
Richard, a priority?
Yeah, I mean, I think this word automation is going to come up time and time again, and I 100% agree. Probably just from a slightly different lens, is to really ensure that at a macro level, all the stuff we talked about, data, audiences, measurement, but actually the frictionless workflows between buy and sell, just to make that completely automated in all shapes and forms, because as we move into addressable world, you've got to have that frictionless loop as a virtuous positive circle. So that's critical for me.
Bradley, Pearl is back, which means we're out of time. One quick priority from you, a single sentence.
Yeah, the same frictionless service. So the simple communication back and forth between advertisers and publishers just needs to improve.
Gents, thank you so much for your time. The paper is available on the CTS website, everybody. Pearl, over to you.
Thank you so much, John. That was great. Wow, it's amazing to see how far the industry has come. And I'm excited to see this addressableness and stop seeing commercials that don't reflect what I want to see. I'm tired of seeing everything about insurance and pharma. I'm like, it'll be great to finally see something that, I mean, I love commercials and the creativity of it. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to seeing that you guys are still emphasizing consumer privacy, and that's really important. I know the Netflix documentary Social Dilemma freaked out a lot of people, so that's great that that is top of mind for you. And I love what you said, Richard, on all ships must rise, and you're collaborating across the industry. That's something that is really critical. So thank you so much to you all.